Welcome to Cebsar Talk. I am Evans Apia Kisi, the host of Cebsar Talk. Cebsar is Center for Better Society Advocacy and Research Africa. Cebsar Africa is a non-profit organization that believes in a better society for all. We in Cebsar Africa believe that a better society begins with you and I. Hashtag, a better society begins with me. For more information, please log on to www.cebsarafrica.org. Please follow us on the various social media platforms: YouTube, Cebsar Talk, Facebook at Cebsar Africa, Instagram, Cebsar Africa, and Twitter at Cebsar Africa. Like always, today we bring you another interesting discussion on the topic Ghana's housing policy. Ghana, like most global South countries, has millions of housing deficits due to growing urban population and high cost of housing. In Ghana, previous and current government have implemented a number of formal housing schemes such as affordable housing, mortgage assistance scheme, and rent-to-pay agreements. These formal arrangements are limited to the few middle to high income classes. This implies that majority of the low income is resort to private rental housing schemes known as the informal rental schemes. Meanwhile, informal rental schemes are exploitative and worsens the financial burden of most rental seekers. In this episode of Cebsar Talk, we discuss and inform housing development policy in Ghana. Areas of focus include effects of formal and informal rental housing schemes and the ways to address housing deficits in Ghana. And to help us discuss this important issue is Dr. Abedi Asante. He's an expert in urban and real estate development. He's currently a lecturer at the Department of Estate Management, Kumasi Technical University, Ghana. He holds PhD in geography from the Humboldt Universität zu Berlin in Germany. He also holds MSc in urbanization and development from the London School of Economics and Political Science, England. He also holds BSc in land economy from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Ghana. I must say that it's a pleasure to host you. Welcome to Cebsar Talk, Dr. Abedi Asante.
Thank you very much, Evans. And I'm happy to be here.
Great. We are also happy to host you. And I'm sure today is also the first time that you are live on Cebsar Talk. I must also say that we are streaming live on Facebook like we do always. And for those of you who follow me, AK Mensah and Cebsar Africa, please do share for us. And don't forget to bring your questions, comment, so that we would have a lively and fruitful discussion today. So Doc, welcome once again. And let me start it this way. Like we read from the synopsis, we've had promises upon promises. At least as young and old as I am, I remember from Kufuor's time hearing of affordable housing, and I think this has continued until presently. But we keep on hearing of housing deficits also at a very fast pace. The question is, beyond government also, I must also add that we've also seen private developers build new houses and a whole lot of people building houses. So what is accounting for this? Why is it that with all these houses that are being built across the country, we still talk about housing deficits in Ghana? What is the problem?
I think that the issue has to do with the fact that most of the private developers we have in the country at the moment have a target market. and which is mostly the high income group within our society. And that has been the trend since the 1980s when the private sector really got into real estate development in Ghana and in other parts of Africa. So what we see is that because the focus is overly on the high income end, they are producing the housing, but it looks like that sub-market seems to be getting a little exhaustive. And the sub-market, which is and when I talk about sub-market, it means a section of the entire real estate market where there is demand, is not the focus of the private sector. And that particular sub-market I'm talking about is the low and middle income. And even among the middle income, we have what we call the high middle income and the low middle income. So because the target is more on the high income, earners, you're providing a lot of houses, but this small section and the high income group, I would say, constitutes not more than, let's say, 20% of the entire population, of the entire market, whether people who are ready and willing to buy accommodation. So we see people or real estate developers are providing the housing, but the chunk of the population, which is about 80% of the people, cannot afford the kind of houses that they are putting up. And there's this statistics that say that for most Ghanaians, about 80% of Ghanaians cannot buy houses that cost more than 72,000 Ghana cedis. And that's not enough, because if you look at the kind of houses the real estate developers are putting up, most of them are in dollar rates somewhere beyond $100,000. And $72,000 means that even if you factor their profit into it, it means that you have to build housing that costs somewhere around 60,000 Ghana cedis. And in Ghana, it will be difficult to have such an issue. But the developers cannot also be blamed, because they are also in the market for profits. And so what we see is that the people also at the low end where there is demand also do not have what we call effective demand, which is the ability to be able to afford. So imagine if we say that the private developers should even leave the high-end market and focus on the low-income market. What kind of housing can they provide at a figure of somewhere around 60 to 70,000 Ghana cedis? The market is such that even a piece of land in most places in Accra and most of our cities, you would get somewhere around 10,000 Ghana cedis. That's basically like land that is, within the peri-urban areas, not within the city center. So it's a complex issue, but the key answer to this is that the kind of houses that is being provided is not for the majority of the population. So a lot of people cannot afford the kind of housing that is being provided. That's just the answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So you say that the main problem is that the target, that's if you look at the private developers, usually their target is not the greater part of the population that constitutes the lower in income. I wanted to ask you a question, which in a way you also already talked about though, but still for clarity's sake. So why won't the private developers, at least focus on these low incomers and build houses that would be affordable for the low incomers, or this would not be lucrative?
Yes, I think looking at the kind of profit margin they want to earn, looking at the price of the land, looking at the cost of building materials, and the kind paying staff and all that, and all these dynamics, when you put them together, seems a little difficult for them to provide a housing that costs, a certain amount. So, and that is why over the period, it's not a new discussion, it's not a new issue actually. It's been, on the table or on the agenda for so long that the government or even the people of Ghana have been calling on real estate developers to look at the low and middle income market. But it seems not to be working. For some reason, all these things that I've mentioned seem not to make it possible in the meantime. So even I cannot point to one scheme that I can say that this has been a successful low income or middle income, housing for Ghanaians. It's not any that I, at least from my research and from the very experience that I have within the industry, I can point to and say that this is a scheme that we have seen private developers really build for low income. So the dynamics makes it, I won't say impossible, but quite difficult at this point in time to provide housing for that group. Because if you look at people who are in the majority, you have like the ordinary trader, you have sometimes entry-level graduates, also falling within that group. And I think the issue also is that incomes in Ghana are also generally very low. And so you find that even people that you expect to be able to afford housing are also not able to afford it. So that's also the dynamic. So you find a teacher, who still would fall within the low income group, but elsewhere, a teacher or a nurse or someone, with some kind of stable employment should not fall within a particular category. But income levels also play a role in these dynamics.
Thank you. We'll definitely come to the point where we would hear from you the way forward in trying to address this issue. But let's look at this question as well. So the majority of people are not able to access these kind of houses that are built by the private developers. It's clear. So usually they resort to the informal kind of rental schemes.
Exactly.
But again, we still talk about housing deficits. Yes. So what is wrong with the informal rental scheme as well? What is it that it's not able to at least deal with the market failure in the formal rental schemes?
Yes. I think what we are seeing also at the informal levels also is that the housing at the informal space is also provided by the private landlords. So most of them, for instance, if I want to enter the market, I want to build a house and give it for rent, I may most probably have to use my personal resources, to build. Or even if I think I get to a point I need to fall on a bank, I go for a bank loan at the market rates. So there is really what I see, there is no coordinated attempt to also help housing providers at the informal level. So you see, it's just one person, provide this housing and give it out. You see another person. It's not like the real estate developers who form an association and are in groups, and we see, the numbers of houses they are providing. At the informal level, the housing provision is quite limited. And that is also where the demand is also very high. So I think that's also the issue. So when people build, typically with their own resources, or they borrow money from banks at the market rates, then it means that it becomes their only source, of income or investment that they think that they can, get any income that they expect from. And that is why we see that the trend of the rent advance system, because I've been on, I've listened to some radio interviews here and there, and some landlords were interviewed about this scheme, and they will always tell you how much they have invested in the house and how much they also expect their money back within the shortest possible time. They need to recoup their investment. So I think that probably we will talk about those interventions, but just as a start, maybe we'll focus on housing providers within the informal sector, because the demand there is very high and those providing are also very few. We are not seeing sort of a coordinated effort within amongst the private real estate developers. So we just individual springing up here and there. So at the informal level, it's quite even sometimes difficult to find new housing, because it's just on individual basis, and they provide very few accommodation at a point in time.
Mm. Thank you very much. So pretty much you say that the reason the informal sector is also not doing much is that there is no coordinated attempt to assist informal housing producers.
Exactly.
I know there's been a few policies that have been outlined by the current government, also from yesterday's budget reading. We would come to that to hear your view on whether these schemes are able to do that. But there's this question that usually young folks would ask, including myself, whether would you advise, with your expertise, would you advise house buying or building? And what would you say should be the main factors, informing the decision to buy or rent a house?
I think that mostly we have to look at the characteristics of the person involved. So if I were to use myself or anybody else as an example, I would maybe one factor would be to look at income. So what is your level of income? Is it able to support the purchase of a house? Or you think that because your income may be low, you may want to, invest in building a house, gradually. You may want to save, up to a point, and then you build also up to another level. So for people whose incomes are relatively low, they may have to do some savings in order to be able to do any form of housing investment. But if your income is high and you can even afford a mortgage or something, it's usually sort of advisable if you can go for to buy a house. But I'm coming to other points that may also determine whether you should go for house, you should buy a house or you should build on your own. We can also think about sort of locational preference. So there are certain places people want to live. So if I'm going to buy a house, what are some of the considerations? Am I very, very specific about the kind of place I want to live and all these other factors of the level of security within the area, how close is it? If I have younger kids and I want to make sure that it's also quite close to where they school, all those factors that comes to play when a family is thinking about where to locate. So that will also play a role where you really want to live, your locational preference, and then even your family composition. You might be thinking of also buying a house, but what is the kind of space within the house? Is it okay for your family? So if you have a family of let's say 5, means the man and the woman and 3 kids, and you are considering whether to buy or to build. Do you want to build to your tastes, or you want to buy an existing property and then make some modifications? So that will also play a role. And then sometimes the age of the individual. Younger people who have a lot of years also ahead of them may want to decide that I want to take my time to build my own house. But people who are relatively advanced in age might not really have that luxury of time to wait. Probably pension is approaching. And if you think you have the resources, it might be better to buy because you don't want to go for pension and then you are struggling with having a place to stay. So these are some factors that people can take into account, and I think that it will really be helpful. And sometimes if you also the time that you have at your disposal. If you are a very busy person and you think you cannot monitor a house, building of a house, then I think you might probably be better off. Or even if you live outside the country, but you're Ghanaian and you want to build, and you think you cannot trust anybody to, take care of the building construction process, then you are better off just buying the house But also you may also have to consider the fact that developer profit and all those things will come to play. So these are just some compromises you may have to take. Whichever way you go, I think the ultimate is that you get a housing that meets your satisfaction.
Interesting. Thank you very much. So mainly for our audience, factors such as your income, the location preference, family composition, age of the individual, and then time. These are very important to help one come to a conclusion regarding whether to buy or build a house. But maybe one follow-up question, and also this is more for the for our audiences and also for the purposes of education, because you said that if you feel you have very high income, then you would probably say as a young person, you could go, or you could rather go for a mortgage. And I'm just asking, in Ghana, do we have mortgage system? That is one. And two, is it people living abroad? Can we also, try and enter into this mortgage system?
Yes, it's readily available. Most of the financial institutions have this scheme. So we have the Ghana home loans in Ghana, and once you express interest and you meet the criteria or the requirements, then you sort of put on the mortgage and you can have access to it. And what I also know about is that apart from the ones that the private banks roll out, there's also the sort of the collaborative effort between the government and the private sector, and which is one of them is the National Housing and Mortgage Housing Scheme, and which is also currently running. And then there's also the Public Sector Housing Scheme, which is also in place. And prior to this interview, I did some research about like the mortgage, the state of mortgage in Ghana, and to find out even more about this national housing and mortgage scheme. And I got to know from a very reliable source that since it began somewhere in 2019, the National Housing and Mortgage Scheme, they've disbursed mortgage to about 61 individuals who have benefited from this particular scheme. And then in total, that is amounting to about 6.7 million Ghana cedis. And so on the average, it's about each person is getting about roughly 109,000 Ghana cedis, to support the buying of a house and all. And I'm also told that this scheme is a collaborative effort, and so government is providing 25 million Ghana cedis, and then the private sector, which are some three banking institutions, financial institutions, the Stanbic, I'm told Republic Bank, and one other institution are providing also the remaining, which is the 25 million. So mostly when the individual needs the fund, they make sure that it's 50-50. So 50% of the money is from the government coffers, and then the remaining is from that. So it looks like generally the interest in mortgage is not so much, because you ask yourself for a housing scheme that is supposed to be supporting the purchase of house and people will relatively be comfortable, and looking at the housing deficit and the housing challenge that we all Ghanaians have been complaining about, you would think that such a scheme should be patronized by a number of people, not 61, as I got from one financial institution. Of course, putting the three institutions together, it may be more, but the desire or the willingness to take mortgage is also not there, probably because of interest rates, and people think that when you build, it's cheaper. When you build, it's cheaper. Well, of course, the understanding is that for mortgage, the developer or the financial institution has factored their interest and all that into the amount. and so it's quite expensive. So that's really the impression, for number of people. So that is why most people will not even entertain any mortgage discussion. For people who also want a mortgage, they go for it. And some of them, I have a friend who he works with one of the banks and also got a mortgage. And I think his was for a period of, 15 years. And he has now finished paying and is living in his house. So to some extent, I think that instead of renting, sometimes the mortgage helps. So it's as if you are living in the house and you are paying rent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You see, it's like you are living in the house and you are paying rent. But the other issue also is that for mortgage, it's not the full amount of the house, the full price of the house that you get from the mortgage institution. They mostly give about 70% of the cost of the house. So it means that you have to sort of pay the remaining 20%, and the remaining 70% is spread for you through the mortgage. But so in a way, the mortgage also helps sort of create that affordability of housing, because then you don't have to think of raising the entire amount or for the property, but raise only 20% and get a financial institution that is ready to spread. But sometimes it's difficult for a number of people to really understand the scheme this way. The focus is more on the profit of the developer and then the financial institution, the interest rate they are going to charge. And so people traditionally want to avoid that. And then the other issue that I also like to mention is that there's this also understanding that the housing provided through mortgages are also just any standard housing that is sold for so high a price. You see, so yes, you have finished developing the house and I think it's good. You are providing the mortgage on it, and which we can, spread payments. But on the other hand, if I look at the same amount of money that I'm going to use for the mortgage, the entire value of the mortgage, it's also saying that I can use it to build another house, that will meet my need. So I don't want to go for something, just any standard form of housing for so, like where the price is very high. I would relatively want to save something, and the profit that the interest rate I'm supposed to pay on the mortgage could also go to buying or building my own house. So that's sort of we don't find a lot of interest in mortgages in Ghana.
Thank you very much. I think I would definitely add another one also, because this is one from our audience. I think I chipped in that in our questions, but thank you. It's good to learn that we indeed have a mortgage system in Ghana, and people can patronize. But I like that you also stress that it's a pity that since 2019 that we had this national housing and mortgage scheme, we've had only 61 individuals. Of course, you were quick to add that it could be more if you put the other institutions together. But there's one question here, kind of a follow-up. Do we have trusted organization or company that can help people living abroad to purchase house in Ghana? Can you recommend any of these organizations? So this is from Gabriel Fiaponu, because you mentioned two institutions already. You talked about the Ghana Home Loans and of course the National Housing and Mortgage Scheme. Are you able to advise our brothers and sisters abroad?
Yes, I think that the Ghana Home Loans is very reliable. And then there's also the Republic Bank. And mostly they are able to help because they have the contact. Sometimes they even have this, like they organize programs where they bring developers together. And on that day, a couple of people can come around and engage the developers. And then if they are interested in any of their housing, they can do that. And then it's organized in the compound of this mortgage company. So once you come there, you express an interest. The developer also has his or her rep there, and then they can all agree and do that. So I would recommend Republic Bank and then Ghana Home Loans. Unfortunately, Ghana Home Loans has just a branch and it's in Accra. So that's the issue with them. I don't know why they are not having a lot more branches like other financial institutions. Then we also have a public bank, which could be found all around the country. And so if anybody, but not like any special organization that is not a financial institution that I can know of. Perhaps any professional, within the real estate industry could provide some advice, as to how to go about the process of acquiring, because we have a number of Ghanaians who live abroad and have been able to secure housing through the mortgage. And for them, your ability to be able to sort of service the payment of the mortgage throughout is what they need. And then they also need to know your income, because they use your income level to determine the installments that you are supposed to be paying over the years. So I think these two financial institutions or any professional within the real estate industry should be able to help them.
Thank you very much. And then also to our fellow Cebsarians, those of you who are watching us and following us, if you've had any experience with this mortgage system, please do share with us. But a few messages here. I think it's more of an add-on to what you are saying, Doc. One from Akosia Momoji says, who qualifies for this mortgage? Is it based on income? Is it only low income earners that qualify? What's the threshold income? And what's the modalities for accessing these mortgaged properties? I don't know if you can say something.
I think that usually the key, because the mortgage would mostly be, the payment would mostly be paid from your income. So that's how the mortgage runs, even though the property will be provided and you will live in it, but you'll be paying from your income. So one of the key things is that you should earn regular income. And then they have a certain amount that they cannot deduct from your account. I think you cannot, it's just like any bank loan or something. You cannot deduct more than, I think, 40% of the person's income as, some form of deduction. So you cannot go beyond 40%. And you need to earn up to a certain amount for most institutions to be able to be able to qualify for that mortgage. And once you meet that income, then I think they will also want to ensure that your employer or wherever you are employed is also known, so that you don't just go and present any document at all. They would want to make sure that the document is known. And then the property that you are going to be living in would also be used as a collateral. So in the event that you default payment at a point during the period of the payment, then the bank would fall on that property that you are living in. And that is why for mortgage, they don't give you 100% of the money that you need to buy the property. They won't give you 100% because when you default, the bank should be able to get back their money. And so that's why they will give you 70%. So at the point when you default, you may have paid for, let's say, a period of 5 years. So at that point in time, they would value the property. If you cannot pay again, you value the property, and whatever amount they get, they deduct the rest of the money that you have to pay. And if there is any excess, they can give it back to you. So that is how it works. So you have to know the terms and conditions also surrounding the mortgage. It's also very important that you read. And I think in Ghana or among Ghanaians, we don't have that reading. Once the terms and conditions, and it's a lot, about 3 or 4 pages, people are sometimes in a rush to sign documents without really taking note of, some of the minute details that can become very crucial at a later time. So we need to really understand what we are entering, especially for mortgages, before we sign any documents. So that's what the modalities. Once we find any person who is interested, we speak to the bank. They can always give us the cap as to how much the individual should earn to qualify for a certain amount. So it's not also a flat rate. Your income determines how much you qualify for. So that's how. how long it will even take you to even pay the entire debt.
Thank you very much. There seems to be a lot of interest with this mortgage system.
Okay.
And maybe still to add to it, Akosua Momo continues to also talk about the fact that at times the paperwork is a barrier. Usually, she goes on to say, those of us who live abroad, Ghana makes things too difficult for us, requiring too many local documents we don't have. I guess maybe this is an advice to Ghana Home Loans and Republic Bank and the others who are championing this mortgage system. But she asked the question, is the information readily available online for review and contact?
Sure. I think for Republic Bank, which is what I've checked already, there's information on their website. And I think their numbers will also be found over there. If there's anybody interested, I also have a very good friend who works at the bank and also within who works on some of these mortgages and all that. So having sort of a direct contact sometimes also really help. So I could also be helpful in putting them together and see how they can also benefit from their package.
All right, great. So Akosua, I'm sure you heard it. You can contact Dr. Asante for any help. There's also another interesting question from Gabriel again. Of course, you earlier on mentioned usually there's this perception about quality of these mortgage schemes, the houses that are often given out. And he says there's also this notion that houses that are meant to be bought are constructed with cheap and low quality building materials, yet they sell them at a very high price. Can you briefly comment on this belief? I know you touched on it, but is this really the case?
Yes, I mean for a number of people, and I did this research about they call something defect liability period. So traditionally, what the developers do is that once you buy any house from them, they give you, it's not a flat period. Some give 6 months, for some is 1 year, but it's typically between 6 to 2 years. So within the first 2 years after you live in the property, what they will do is that any issue, any constructional issues that happen, the developer agrees to repair them for you. And through my interviews, a lot of people were complaining that even most of the fittings and fixtures within the properties are usually of low quality. So within the first 2 years, most of them have gone bad and they have to replace them. Even for door handles and all those things, and the hand wash basin, most of them seem to have issues within the first 2 years. And yet these are properties that you have paid lots of money for. For some of them, it's through a mortgage. So it means that you are still servicing the mortgage. And already parts of the houses are already, deteriorating. And for some, it's even the roof. And the idea for some people during the research is that, yes, the developer agrees that he will repair. But the same developer who put low quality house is the one who is also coming to repair.
So they cannot be trusted.
The assurance that he's going to do, or going to do the right thing. So that's also the issue. As for low quality housing within that space, it's a very important thing, and most homeowners would really point this out if you have any interview with them.
Perhaps then the law would have to check that, because if there's an agreement that once it goes bad, the estate developers would repair it, and they do not. I get the trust issue. If the same people put up this kind of inferior, building, you cannot trust them to be able to do a good repair. But I think then they should be able to enforce some of these things. And that brings me back to also another question that has been asked about our rent policy. That is the violation of charging advance payment for 2 years. Now in the informal rent scheme also. What's your take on that?
The rent advance is also a very topical issue as far as Ghana is concerned. And The little research we have done about this shows that a number of people, particularly who rent housing, it's the most important hurdle that you have to, cross the moment you decide that you need a place to live and you want to rent. And these 2 years has become the norm over the period, and this dates back to somewhere in the 1980s. And it has been the trend, it has continued. Successive governments have tried and made efforts to sort of stop the practice, because ideally, per the law, landlords are not supposed to charge beyond 6 months, for normal accommodation. Like the first payment should be 6 months, and subsequently you pay on monthly basis. But that has not been the practice, unfortunately. A lot of landlords now think that the 2 years, for most of them, they don't even know about the 6 months, and they think that the 2 years is the trend. And the funny thing is that you even find people who are educated, know about the law, but are still landlords and charging is 2 years. It's become the trend. And I have always said that any government of Ghana who is able to address rent advance issue is going to make a break in terms of housing in Ghana, because for some people, for someone like me, if you ask me to rent a house that is going for about 800 Ghana cedis, 900 Ghana cedis a month, and I'm supposed to pay on monthly basis, I can pay. By the moment you say that I should pay 900 cedis for 2 years, that's over 10,000 Ghana cedis, I cannot raise the money immediately. And for some people, if you still want that accommodation and you don't have the money, you have to go to a financial institution to go and rent, and they will give it to you at the open market rate. You pay almost about 25%, sometimes about 30%, just to get some money to come and pay the rent. So you see that you may be paying, and then the installments that you'll be paying to the bank would usually be higher than the rent that you are using the money to pay, because now the bank has also added their interest to the loan that has been given to you. So it becomes a challenge for a number of people who want to really rent good. So you find that because of rent advance, a lot of people cannot live in decent houses. They cannot live in decent houses. So you find even sometimes a medical doctor, and you see the kind of place they live, and you think that this is not ideally, befitting of someone probably of that stature. But that's the kind of housing they can afford with the rent advance. Yet, if you give that same person, if you were allowed that same person to pay on monthly basis, he could have been able to afford an accommodation which is slightly higher than what they are currently, living in. So rent advance is a major issue. And you see, the other thing with rent advance also is that the housing industry or the rental market is said that once you pay rent advance, it doesn't end there. We have done research that shows that most houses in Ghana are rented unfurnished. So unfurnished is, for some of us who have experienced housing in Europe, where you get in there, there's a bed, there's probably a fridge, there's a cooker, those basic items that you need to live within the meantime are provided. But in Ghana, it's just an empty accommodation given to you. So it means that after you have paid a rent advance of 2 years, you now also have to now battle with acquiring the basic and essential things, for the house. So for first-time renters, it's usually a hell of a time. For regular renters who have been renting from one point to the other, they can move some of their old items and keep using as they move. But for first-time renters, it's usually an issue. And just to point another thing out, that sometimes when you are renting, and then at a point you decide that the rental market is not helpful, so you want to build. And another research I have done shows that renting and building a house is also another issue, because you are paying rent advance and you also need some amount of money to also build on your own. And so juggling between the two can also be very stressful for some people. For people who want to read some of my research, I think I would readily make them available if they contact me. But for now, yeah.
And then maybe later also we would have to, because Akosia asked that later you make your numbers and contacts information available to us, so that those who are interested will.
Okay.
Maybe just to, this is more of an add-on from Akosia again.
Okay.
Talking about the plights of also the landlords. She says that I own a property there and I can appreciate the landlords. The landlords get no support from the government. They face inflation and lack of public service. I think you did.
That's true.
And we'll come to this also. So quickly moving on, we've ways to address these challenges. I would say we already started the discussion with the mortgage, the National Housing and Mortgage Finance Scheme that government has introduced. And we've seen some of these challenges here and there. But quickly, in a minute or two, do you find that this scheme is able to address, the housing supply and demand side financing challenges that we face in Ghana? And what then would you recommend, things that should be taken into account so that this scheme is able to do it? Because as you educated us, so far very few people are patronizing this. Gabriel and others also have concerns of the quality. He even asked the question that, so how do we avoid buying such houses with low quality? So what would you say should be done so that this scheme at the end of the day is able to address some of the housing deficits that we have?
For the mortgage scheme, I think that the focus more within our space is the issue, or let me start this way. The issue is that everyone wants to build. But if you look at the trend elsewhere, it's not like that. We have a lot more of people within most cities, bigger cities, and renting. So if you look at across Europe, you'll find that there are more people who are renting than owning houses. So typically you find that if people have been renting for almost all their life, and they are perfectly fine, the moment our culture placed that burden that if you don't build by the time you pass on or probably go for retirement, you don't have a house, you are considered a failure. That is the issue for most of us. So at a younger age, you find that you really, really have to put up a house. So I think that, yes, the mortgage scheme is very useful. And I think that government would still have to support the scheme, but there's a lot more education that I think that would still have to be done with respect to mortgages, and getting a lot more people to really see this as a long-term investment, as a long-term investment, and making sure that people really appreciate the concept, because it's still the issue that a lot of people still don't really appreciate what the benefits of mortgages are. And so people don't mind. Typically, we are told that it takes about 5 to 15 years for most people in Ghana to build their own house, to complete it. 5 to 15 years. So if you are going to spend 5 to 15 years of your life just building your own house, and yet you can get a mortgage and pay within that same period, which one is better? But it also depends on your ability, your income to be able to support the mortgage, because people who don't earn much might want to, really save in bits and then be able to build on their own. But I think that the intervention is that the focus has to be more on the rental market.
We'll come to that.
We'll come to that. Okay.
So basically, for the mortgage system, you would say that there should be more education.
Yes.
I would also add, and also agreeing with what Gabriel has been saying, I also feel that the quality of these houses that come from the mortgage scheme should also be looked at, and the laws should be enforced. You know, if you find any defects as is written, the developers should be able to do that. And you talked about government support as well.
Yes.
We also know that there's also this, and that's what you actually mentioned, the focus now going on the rental scheme, because we know from the current government's manifesto, they talk about the National Rental Assistance Scheme.
Yes.
What is this? And because that's what you feel that this could even help to address most of the challenges. What is this National Rental Assistance Scheme, and how is it able to address the challenges that we have in our housing deficits?
All right, just a bit of history. I think this scheme came into the picture somewhere 2016. So if you look at the NDC manifesto of 2016, it was captured in there. And then in 2020, towards the election, the next manifesto, the 2021, we saw them repeat that. But for NPP, we also saw them introduce that same scheme for the first time. And if you look at both manifestos, they all seem to be talking about the same thing. And the issue is that they want to provide, they've realized that for most Ghanaians, or for a considerable number of Ghanaians, paying rent advance is an issue. Most people find it difficult paying rent advance, and which we all know. And so the 2 years or the 3 years that the landlords charge is usually a lot for a lot of people. And so the government is coming in to support. But when you read the provision or whatever they provided in the manifesto, is that the scheme is supposed to support people in the formal and informal sector who earn regular income. Formal and informal sector, let's take note of this, formal and informal sector who earn regular income. And that you find in the manifesto of the NPP and the NDC. But we also all know that people who can prove regular income are mostly people who have, access to like pay slip and those things. People in the informal sector can't really give you any evidence of regular income. And yet, it doesn't mean that they don't earn regular income. So if you typically take a fitting shop, the owner of a fitting shop, a mechanic, the person could probably be able to pay. But because of that requirement of regular income, it might be an issue for a considerable number of people within the informal sector to be part of this particular scheme. And then the other issue also about it is that, yes, our laws says that landlords should not charge beyond 6 months of rent advance. That's what the law states. Yeah. Now, the landlords are not complying with the law. And you are introducing a scheme that is supposed to support the non-compliance of the law. Because by providing Ghanaians with money to go and pay rent advance of 2 to 3 years to people, it means sort of you are supporting the illegality. So for a number of people, it's not about providing us the money to go and pay the rent advance. It's not as if people just want to be helped. But the point is that try to get the landlords to try to enforce the law so that we can do it ourselves. The assistance is crucial, but it has a lot of issues. You understand that the assistance is good, but eventually it still boils down to the same point, because when the government pays the money for you, it's not free. What they are only doing is that it's just like any form of rent to pay or any form of mortgage or something. So they pay upfront for you, and then you are supposed to pay. They spread the payment of the amount for you to pay gradually. So because the bulk money will become an issue, then they pay the money upfront and then you pay in bits. So technically you are still paying the 2 years, which people don't support. So get the landlords, enforce the law, and let the landlords, take the 6 months of rent advance, and not trying to introduce a scheme which tries to, institutionalize the whole 2 years of advance rent, and 3 years, and some are even charging sometimes 5 years. So it means that it becomes sort of the landlord's prerogative to decide how much he wants to charge. Go to the government and go and take money from them and come and pay me. And so that's
it's a very interesting perspective. And as you talk about the fact that it appears government is condoning wrongdoing or trying to institutionalize it by giving people money. And so this scheme also perhaps should be looked at. For the sake of our time, I would have to do it quickly.
Okay.
But then is it also fair to say that the current government, in addition to the rental assistance scheme, also talks about incentivizing private developers to build more social housing, the issue of social housing? If you could also help us. For example, Kofi Gavu says it's high time Ghanaians consider rental housing as well as social housing as options to curb the deficit. As a country, we force people to build their own house when they really cannot afford. Kindly ask Dr. Asante, what specifically should government do to regulate the market in a market where price is dictated by landlords? I think we've talked about this already, and it's a pity that it's even getting institutionalized by the very scheme called the National Rental Assistance. But what is this social housing, and is it fair to say that with the attempt to incentivize private developers, then at least would you find this as more feasible to address the challenges?
I think from experience elsewhere, we don't find a lot of social housing in Ghana. But from experience elsewhere, the way social housing operates, so mostly the state would usually be helpful depending on the family or household income, and make sure that, yes, people live in very decent accommodation, but are supported to be able to, live comfortably. So the same accommodation someone else could live in and pay 700 cedis, you could live in and be paying something below because of the household income is not able to support that. So the social housing is where the state supports sort of renting or the purchase of some accommodation. So they provide a portion of the amount that you need in order to be able to buy or to rent an accommodation. And I think that if we introduce that in Ghana, it will really help. But it also means that the government would also sort of have to create, some fund. And I think that this national rent assistance scheme would even serve a better purpose in the form of social housing than the way it is currently framed, so that people who are in dire need, and probably need a little more support. If for some people, the family size, to live in a very decent accommodation, they can probably afford 300 cedis. The government can come in if the accommodation is going for, let's say, 600 cedis. The government can pay the remaining 300% to make sure that they have that kind of accommodation. But social housing will also mean that government will also have to intervene. They have to also be part of the provision of housing, because it cannot always be people's housing that you are supporting other people to, but it means that government will also have to build more, and it has to be seen, not the few affordable housing that we have in the system and which have been completed, and yet most Ghanaians, still can't afford them. So the affordable housing are not affordable. Eventually, when they were finally completed, they are really not as affordable as we expected. So I think that's the bit about
the social housing and but that's also very interesting. I feel that our followers are more, in a way, also interested in more of the mortgage system. I would later come to you to hear your thoughts on basically what interventions, if you summarize everything, you feel could address the housing deficit, given the ones that are being rolled out. But I'm sure that the education now is out there so that we look, you said something which was very important for me about if the National Rental Assistance Scheme could rather be used to support this social housing scheme. I think this would you see would serve a better purpose than. So Akosia Momo again adds to the plight of landlords, I would say. She says even light poles and sewage is provided by property owners, not the city or government, and demand also exceeds high. Maybe quickly, if you could do this in a minute or two, how much mortgage are we talking about? What's the minimum and maximum that can be given? I don't know if you have an answer to that with regard to the mortgage scheme. Can one access more than one mortgage scheme, and the quantum?
Yes, I think that it should be possible depending on your income level, but the quantum is what I can't really recall unless I do a little research about it, but I don't have really the figures at the moment. Yeah.
And you know where the houses are located, the mortgage scheme, the house?
Yes. I mean, they are not, you see, the mortgage scheme is said that you cannot, they are not really grouped in a particular location. So it's just like a developer can provide, let's say about 100, different types of housing, and a few could be on mortgage. The mortgage, whether it will be on mortgage, depends on who is coming to live in the house. You see, so that's really what determines. So you cannot readily tell which housing is on mortgage or not unless you get that information from either the developer or the person who is currently occupying the accommodation, or from maybe the mortgage institution. They can also give such locational figures, but it's not readily available that the mortgage institutions or the mortgage properties can be found in this particular location. They are scattered all over the city or the country. So.
Very well. Unfortunately, our time is fast spent. We'll be an additional 5 minutes. So, but one message again from Akosia, she's adding to what we've discussed so far here. She's in Canada. The state purchases units from private complexes also, and allow low-income people to live in these private properties. That's in addition to government-owned property. Do we have such a system in Ghana?
No, not at all.
But this could also be interesting, no?
This could help. I didn't get it.
Also help to.
Yes, it could also help.
The government now will buy these private properties or rent it, and
you're right, and give it out. And this could also be a form of even social housing.
Yeah.
So the private developer would have, let's say, if even they are ready to give it out for rent, you could be going for, let's say, 800 to 1,000 Ghana cedis. But once the state comes in to acquire it, they can readily give it to people for 500 cedis, and it's a form of social housing. So it's standard accommodation. So that's the difference. For affordable housing, it's using sort of low quality materials to provide housing, and it's supposed to be cheaper. So affordable housing is providing cheaper housing, but social housing is not like that. It's providing standard accommodation, that meets, the standard everywhere, but at a cheaper amount or for a cheaper rent. You see, so that's the difference between what the affordable housing is and the social housing.
Thank you very much. I guess social housing perhaps is the way to go. It's not too late for the government to have a look at that policy. So finally, Doc, what would you say would be some interventions? I mean, you could summarize what we've already talked about that you feel are key to addressing housing deficit in Ghana. There was also a question, but I couldn't ask about what do you feel would be good housing for students, single family, couples, big family. I don't know if you would, but what would be important for us would be the way forward. I mean, which interventions, be it public or private, you feel would be able to address the housing challenges that we have in Ghana?
Okay. I think one of them, which is the most important for every Ghanaian, particularly those for low income and middle income where the demand is high, is enforcement of our rent law. And once we are able to enforce it, now I'm told there's a law currently in the process, and in the law it's stated that rent advance will now be 1 year. The legal rent advance will now be 1 year. But that is already in existence. That has already been practiced. Some landlords already charge 1 year. So that's not really an improvement on the situation as people really expected. So the major intervention that can be done for Ghanaians, and that I think can even put money in people's pockets, because that 2 years or 1 year of rent advance that you are paying to a landlord can be used for some other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so once we are able to implement the law to let people just pay 6 months and be able to pay monthly rents, we are indirectly putting money into people's pockets, because it means that this chunk of money is not going elsewhere, and we can use them for something else, some other forms of investment that can also, be helpful to us. So I always say that the focus of government should be in the rental market. We should make sure that the rental market is doing very well. Yes, of course, this scheme to support the rent advance is key, but in addition to that, we need to implement the law. And then if we still want to maintain the scheme to support even the 6 months, because even when it is 6 months, some people might struggle to still afford the 6 months of advance rent. And that is where really the need is. So instead of thinking about where the 2 years makes it difficult for a large group of people, reducing or enforcing the law diminishes or reduces the number of people who have difficulty. And then the few people who have difficulty can now be helped. You see, so I think that is key. And then also on the side of the landlords, I also think that some of them may also have to comply, with the provision, because there are also a number of landlords who charge 6 months, I must say, who charge 6 months and are willing to even take 6 months and some monthly payments. But for the majority of them, that has not been the case. So if we can also get our landlords to be also law abiding, you see, in order to ensure that the rent advance laws or whatever provisions are provided in the law are complied with, I think it will also go a long way to really help the markets. And so I think that the major intervention from both sides, government should pay attention to the rental market and make sure that our laws are enforced. And then the landlords should also comply.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So one last message from a couple of messages, actually one from Michael Edujemfi says, great discussions. Kojo Mensagavu is adding to what you said, Doc. One can have access to any mortgage value so long as their income can meet the required repayment, which typically should not exceed 50% of your salary. And mortgages have income tax advantages. Thank you very much. So clearly, from what Doc has said, if we want to arrest or address the housing deficit challenges that we have in Ghana, a key focus should be on enforcing our rental laws.
Yes.
It's not only the duty of government to do that, but it's also the duty of landlords to be able to comply with the 6 months rent. We know they go through a lot, as has been shared by some landlords here. They provide everything themselves, including poles and electricity and the likes. But I think that if the landlords would comply with the 6 months, and if government would also enforce the rental laws, we'll be able to make a headway as a country. We also hope that government will be able to support these landlords, and perhaps if these schemes, mortgage systems that we are talking about, also if more education goes into it, this could help us address our housing deficit. Thank you very much, Dr. Louise Asante, and thank you very much for those of you who shared your concerns, comments, questions with us. I am Evans Apia Kisi, the host of Cebsar Talk. Do make time with us next week as we bring you another interesting discussion. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day, evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.